Okay, so one of the cool features with the EliteDesk 800 Mini as compared to the 400 and the 600 is that it's primarily for corporate environments. And one of the things that the corporate environments like to be able to do is to access these computers remotely. And one of the neat things with that is something called vPro. And that comes with these particular Elite desks. And what I wanted to show was how to set up vPro or I think they also call it AMT, various other names, how to set it up on your Elite desk. And this would work on from the G1 through the G5, and I'm presumably, later on. And then also the software that you're going to need to be able to remotely connect to your machines. Got a couple different options for that. So I wanted to kind of show that. Um, the vPro, for those that might only have, let's say, a single unit, might not really be that useful. I'm thinking of more cases of people that maybe have a Proxmox cluster. Maybe they've got one set up as a NAS. Maybe they've got, just several out there. Just a way where they can centrally go and connect to these units. Granted, you could use things like Windows RDP, but what if you don't have Windows running? You're running Linux or some other kind of setup, or you just want to be able to check the BIOS version on it, or other kinds of things on the unit, and you don't want to have to, plug in a monitor, keyboard, etc. You just want to get in there and check the stuff out. You may even want to remotely turn it back on. Maybe you've turned it off to save power, or you're just not going to use it anymore. But instead of having to maybe trudge to wherever it is, maybe it's up on a shelf somewhere, you could use vPro to remotely turn it on. So that's some of the neat features. So I kind of want to show some of the things that you can do with vPro, and again, how to get it set up. I'll be doing some of the setup and showing you how to get the stuff configured using a G4 35 watt. But very similar in all the other, the G2, G3, etc. Very similar. So let's start at the real very beginning. Now, when you go into the BIOS, what you should see is a choice. It's normally off of tied to the F6 key, and it will be something called, I think it's called ME boot or ME configuration, something like that. You'll notice here I don't have it, and that's because it's been disabled or turned off for this particular computer. So what I want to do is go into the BIOS setup, and I want to go over to advanced. I want to come down to remote management options, and I want to make sure that this is on. You notice the Intel management engine, it's off. I want to turn that off, and I also want to make sure that this one is turned on, Intel Active Management Technology. So these two together are what we want to have set. So if I say OK and come back here, and then I save changes and exit, now as it's booting back, we'll see when we come back that it's going to show up. Okay, so now we've got the ME setup, the F6. So if I come down here, it's going to come into this particular configuration. Now this looks like someone may have already set it up. So, which happens, of course, you're going to get these units off of, resell off of corporate, and sometimes they don't clear this stuff out. And I come in here to do the login. Now the default password is just admin. So I come in and I type in admin. Oh, invalid password. Try again. Well, that probably means that this is wrong. So if I try enough times, it's actually going to reboot the machine. So here, max password, system will be reboot. But I'll show you what we need to do then so that we can reset and be able to set our own password. So it's going to say OK, and we'll reboot. Okay, so this time we're going to go back into the BIOS setup. I'm going to go to advanced again. I'm going to go to remote management options, and notice this says unconfigure AMT on next boot. So what we want to do is we want to set this and set apply. This is going to flush everything out and allow us to set our own password, our own IP address, the whole thing. So we'll say apply, and then the same thing, save changes and exit, yes. You notice it has this found unconfigured, okay to unconfigure it, sure. Now we can go into F6. Click on the login. Now we can type in admin and then make sure to give it a password that you can easily remember. Long time from now, if you ever come back. Okay. We can go into the configuration. What I like to do is down under user consent, I like to change this to none since we're the ones that own these units anyway. Want to go to network setup. Let's give it a name that we can, that way if we're ever trying to figure out which machine we're talking about. And let's go in and give it a static IP. And this should be an IP address that's only used for the vPro. You can give your Windows and anything else that's running on the machine completely different IP address, and you should. Subnet, we can get that off of Windows by going into DOS, go to ipconfig. Your gateway, normally this is your main router, and that would also be in the ipconfig. And oftentimes your DNS is also the main router. Next, we'll want to pick the activate network access. That way you can actually get to the unit. And continue, yes. Okay. And let's see. I don't believe, let's see, remote setup. No. I think that's all we need at this point. We're going to hit escape and then just say exit, and that will save it. And then we'll just let it boot up, and then I'll show you how you can get connected. Yes, you want to exit? So the easiest way to connect to your vPro is just by launching a browser. And what you want to do is you want to give the IP address, : and then 16992. And when you type that in, it's going to come to this login screen. You can type in login, admin, and then your password that you put in when you were configuring. Okay. And here we got system, processor, memory. Kind of neat to know exactly what kind of modules you've got. And again, you're doing this all remotely. One thing, when I first was running this, I wasn't getting any kind of information. And it looks like it had to do with the fact that something didn't get all cleared out. So if you do tell the system to clean out the AMT or the Intel AMT settings, make sure to let it do everything. It's going to reboot, and then once everything is cleared out, then go in and set your settings. Otherwise, it gets in this kind of middle state. That was my problem, and ended up having to do this video a second time. So remote control doesn't do much other than you can do things like power off from the web page. But what I want to show you is something that gives you even more capabilities and that completely free, and you'll even be able to do remote desktop on it. Let me show you that one. So what you want to type in is meshcentral.com. You want to go to downloads, and they have lots of different ones, command line tools and so forth. What I would probably start out with is the Mesh Commander. That's for Windows. The Mesh Central is basically it's a web version. It basically creates a web server on your local machine. And it is runnable from Windows, from Mac. Under Linux, you can just use the Node.js to run it. So, it's got a lot of options. They're kind of the same, but let's look at Mesh Commander. And so what I did is I downloaded it, installed it. It's very straightforward as far as the installation. And let me show you what that looks like. So here's Mesh Commander. The first thing that we want to do is we want to add the computer that we were just configuring. So what I would do is hit scan. It defaults basically to your all your network addresses. Hit the scan button. It found a couple different ones that are already out there. The one we were interested in is the 1.63. Put the check mark, say OK. Then we want to click on connect. Type in again our password. One of the things I would recommend for the remote desktop, I ran into some issues when I was experimenting and it seemed to just sort of lose its connection. I would change this from 3 to 30. Just to give you some time to play with. We already have the not required. That's all fine. Let's see for one thing I always like to do, change that to the 30 minutes, but also come to these active features. Click on here. Turn these two on because you're going to need that for the remote desktop. Otherwise, you'll get a warning when you go to the remote desktop area. So say OK. Now, one nifty feature, actually, before we get there, so the same kind of hardware info that you can look here. You can even save it off, which is kind of nice. Same sort of thing on CPUs, the memory, storage. But let's go to remote desktop. And this is kind of neat. So I've got Windows 11 running on my G4. So I can click connect. And after a couple seconds here, you'll see this, and you're connected. Now, if we were to switch to see what it actually looks like, over on the other side. Let's see if we can do that here. Around the outline of the unit, it would have a bunch of I don't know, the whole outline would be almost flashing, so that I guess it's to alert the person, hey, someone is taking over your computer. So let's turn that off, and I'll go back to the other capture. Okay. So we can do all the same sort of things. We can log in. We can run, DOS as a sysadmin. We can do the whole thing. So this is kind of neat. Now, the other thing I wanted to show is the ability to turn the computer back on remotely. So let's say here I've got Windows, and I've decided I'm just going to shut it down. So we'll shut it down. And if I look at the unit, it is completely off. The light is off. It's not even like blinking. It's just off. So here it's off, and then I decide, oh, okay, let's power back on. So I believe you can turn it on from here, or from the main status, we can go to power actions, and we'll say power up. And let's go over to the remote desktop, and we should see it come back up on the screen. And there it is. Pretty cool. Okay. What I'd like to do is do remote desktop, but this time let's boot into the BIOS. Because again, that's something that, let's say if you're trying to make some changes, you don't have to pull out your remote monitor and so forth. So what I'm going to do in that case is, let's shut this down again. Shut down. And let's wait for that to shut completely down. Okay. What I'd like to do is I want to boot it up, but this time I want to boot into the BIOS so I can make some changes. So we'll say power up to BIOS. Say OK. And I should be able, in the remote desktop, it should come into the BIOS instead of going into Windows. Ah, and there we have it. Now, one weird thing, if you can notice, we've got like two mice here. So this one, well, let's see, the one that looks like it's got a little shadow, which is at the top, that's the mouse that's actually on the HP. The one on the lower is my mouse that is on my desktop here. So I have to kind of maneuver it down so I get to the right particular thing I want. Now, I could, of course, use the keyboard, which probably makes a little more sense. So I can do the same sort of things. I can go into BIOS setup. Maybe I want to make some sort of advanced setting. I want to do some other sort of stuff. Most likely, I'd want to check to see if there's any new BIOS available. So, but let's say I'm all done. I hit escape, save changes. Nah, we're not going to worry about it. Now what it should do is, just like the normal computer, it should continue and go back into, oh, well, take that back. I guess, let's see if it's going to boot into Windows, or is it going to, no, I guess it is going to boot into Windows. Now this might be handy too, is let's say you want to boot into, you want to change the boot settings, meaning, hey, I want to boot into my Ventoid disk or something like that. Again, you could go in here, you could go into boot options, stick in your Ventoid, and boot from it. So it kind of gives you some neat stuff to play with that. And you can, if you want, instead of keeping, calling it this, if you double click on here, you could actually put the name that, you want to give it. So, again, I could call it my G4 35 watt 8500T 8500T vPro, something like that. That way I know which one when I come back here. And, again, you could have all your different ones and you connect to all of them to check on the various things. Let me show you real quick the Mesh Central. It kind of similar, but, well, we'll look at it. So this was Mesh Central. And I pull down the installer and ran it here. You launch it by going into localhost. Username is admin. I believe when you first set it up, it asks you for the password that you want to use for admin. Again, I tried to use the same password that I use on all of my vPro units, so just always can kind of remember everything. It's laid out a little differently. Let's see, this one, I think it's, actually, let's do you do very similar, let's do a scan. And same thing, let's grab that one. And we'll click on it. You'll see kind of the setup's a little different. It takes a little bit so that it takes to connect and figure out what's going on. Eventually it's going to know that this is running under Intel. If you click on some of these other ones, okay, so you notice the Intel AMT kind of showed up. I can go in there, it's disconnected, I can connect. So it's almost like 2-in-1. There's this here, but then all the other stuff is sort of duplicated. If I go back over here, it wants the credentials, so I can type those in. And I should be able to still do things like the desktop. Let's see if the hardware connect's going to work on this. I found that the Mesh Commander did a better job of the connecting. You notice here it doesn't seem to be doing anything. Sometimes you have to go over to this guy first, try his version, then pop over and try their version. Let's see if that... no. Let's see, maybe I need to disconnect here. I think the Mesh Central, see now it seems to be working. And you can change your settings a little bit. You can, if you set it, I think maybe the raw 16 is slower, but then you get better, look to it, something like that. Yeah, but this is what you'd have to use if all you're doing is Linux. Conceivably, you could have maybe this set up somehow where it's running on maybe a central NAS that has a virtual Linux on it. I'm debating of doing something like that myself. That way you can be on any machine and be able to connect to it. You could even kind of try it through your phone and see how that goes. But I would say for your average person that maybe and of course, again, if you unfortunately you do need Windows if you want to go the Mesh Commander route. But Mesh Central works just as well. It's kind of nifty, especially if you have a lot of, maybe you've got, 5 or 6 of these guys running on your network. connected up, but you don't want them going all the time. This way you could use this as a way to start up the ones that you're interested in when you need it's almost kind of sort of like having a bunch of VMs, but they're physical machines. So hopefully this will be something of interest. Now you know at least what that vPro does, and some of the capabilities.